Okay, so we're going to get started with our next panel on digital asset management on the web and on the desktop. We're very pleased to have three presentations as part of this, three speakers. So we're going to have little 5 to 10 minute presentations, and then there'll be a time for discussion and questions from the audience. So our first speaker on this panel is Gunnar Pennikus from Adobe, and he is, well, I'll let him tell you what he's going to talk about. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very excited about participating with Creative Commons. It's something that I've been evangelizing within Adobe for the last 4 years. We even invited Larry to come out and talk to Adobe, which was great. I'm going to talk about XMP metadata. It's a technology that we have from Adobe for embedding metadata into files. It's a pretty lengthy presentation, and it's going to be available on the web as well. But I wanted to go through there. First of all, let me get an understanding. How many people have heard of XMP or know of it? So well, that's pretty good. About half, maybe a little bit more than half, 60, 70%. So this is a presentation I give to a lot of Adobe's customers and also partners, and talking about what is metadata. I think everybody knows what that is here, why we need it. Here's a list of things that are happening and the need for what we call intelligent media, which is assets that are effectively tagged richly and have information associated with them. And the bottom line is, everybody's getting overloaded with assets, and metadata is becoming a strategic advantage because fundamentally, if you can't describe it and add information to the asset, you really can't control the asset in many different respects. Another way that I pitch metadata, and sometimes apt to think back on, is imagine if your files could talk and you could actually have a conversation with your files. And I think a lot of the interesting ideas that are coming around with the semantic technologies and so on is really kind of building that foundation of communication that we are eventually going to have with our files, right? Tell me, who you're from, and tell me a little bit more about him or her, and tell me about the rights. Can I use you? Can I not? Where were you used? Things like that. Who else are you related to? So all that webbiness is going to be coming with the semantic web, a lot of fundamental technologies. And XMP is based on a lot of that technology as well. So we call it a platform because for many different reasons. One is it provides a vehicle for carrying information through the files themselves, and it's also supported within the suite of our products. I'm not going to go into each one of these, but they stand on their own. When we were looking at developing this back in the turn of the century, we wanted to identify some key requirements there. And some of these were mentioned earlier in some of the other discussions, and some questions came up about different languages and so on. Robustness, the key feature about XMP is we put the data in the file. We built on standards, RDF and XML serialization of RDF. We have, it's very extensible. Fundamentally, XMP is schema neutral, so you can put whatever type of schema that you want, meaning whatever type of data you want to carry in the file. Universality, we're always striving to add more file formats and support more file formats where we can actually define where to stick the metadata in the file. Fundamentally, we believe that's where it needs to be because that's where wherever the file goes, the data should go with it. Internationalization, Unicode capabilities, which a lot of our customers, such as the IPTC, for example, which is a strong standard in the newspaper and photography world, adopted XMP as their platform for their new standard because it supported multilingual capabilities. And that was important for them as they start thinking about the Olympics and China and so on and so on. So when we sort of step back and say, well, what is XMP? It's a lot of different things, right? We talked about the packaging technology. I'm going to go into each one of these very quickly to give you an example of what this is about. So when we talk about the packet, this is basically the way that we put the metadata in the file. It's pretty simple, right? It's jamming XML into a file format. And we do it in such a way that, one, we have this unique identifier at the top of the packet that says, hey, I'm a packet, there's some metadata coming. And then we have this XML chunk, RDF/XML chunk, which is where all the goodness lives. And then we leave a bit of padding there. The reason we do that is there may be another process downstream that may not necessarily know about the file type per se and wants to add additional metadata. And so that there's a padding space that you can throw in some additional information. and then finally the end. So it's pretty straightforward and simple. In terms of how we use it in our products, we use it across the Adobe products, Photoshop, and so on, and we add the metadata in the file formats themselves. So it's very simple in the sense of a picture, right? It's one file. You add information to the picture. When you start talking about an InDesign layout and different assets coming together, we start to build a structure where we need to support what we call document level metadata and object level metadata. And so we have those capabilities in InDesign, and our goal is fundamentally to preserve as much metadata as we can across the production chain, because it's going to be useful down the road. Somebody's going to want to know where this stuff came from and what are the rights associated with it, and so on. So from the specification perspective, the schema perspective, the Adobe tools themselves have a set of schemas that they look to and are standardized upon in terms of what information flows through the tool set. So there are rights-based information, media information, a lot of camera raw information for how to describe the changes to the camera raw file, things like that. We also work a lot with external standards groups because they're excited about XMP because this is a vehicle for them to get their standard implemented into a set of tools. And we've worked, as I mentioned, closely with the IPTC, a number of different groups here, including Creative Commons, plus advertising ad ID for associating metadata to advertisement chunks and so on, all the way to archive. The interesting thing about this is you start looking at this, it's a workflow that captures metadata from capture, from when the photographer takes a picture, out through archive, through the workflow. And that's what we're trying to promote, sort of interoperability throughout the workflow with our tool set. In terms of how the user interacts with the metadata, we have what we call custom panels. This is basically a dialog box within the Adobe products that you can customize to show a UI that's related to your particular schema and define things such as this is a drop-down list or a text box or a bag of values or so on. So you can describe the user readable label, also the layout, and the storage, how this stuff is actually stored in the XML that's embedded in the file. And the good news is that with the CS4 products coming out, this is actually going to be moving to be a Flex-based interface. So if you're a Flex developer, you now have a very rich interface that you can tap into that's not only static, but also can connect to web services and so on. And so this becomes really interesting and becomes more like active metadata rather than just static metadata. We also have a media organizer within our suite called Bridge, which has some capabilities for showing metadata. I'm not going to get too much into this, but it's also very extensible using Flash and so on. So probably the most exciting thing, I think, for the community is the fact that we have an SDK that's freely available under a BSD license. And what this SDK does is allow you to read and write metadata in a consistent way in multiple file formats, and I've listed some of them here. This SDK is actually the same set of libraries that we use in our Adobe products. And the reason we did that is we wanted to make sure that our partner community and the community in general was reading and writing and manipulating metadata in the same way that our tools are, so that we have consistency in that respect. And that's available from our Adobe URL here. So in terms of a platform, we have a lot of partners that we work with that have supported XMP, and this is where it gets to the original asset management. How does this relate to asset management? Well, XMP is really a communication technology that our partners, our asset management partners, can use to link between our desktop applications and their back-end systems through the media that's flowing between the two. So in many ways, I've been calling XMP now a communication technology because it carries the information in the file wherever that file goes. It's a list of partners that we use, publishing partners and online vendors and so on. And so, going forward, we're always looking at the life cycle of assets and media and how metadata can play a role in the reuse, the remixing, the mashups, whatever, of that, and how to have a consistent communication platform across that life cycle for multiple uses. And so, from a business perspective, I think there are a number of opportunities around efficiency. Rights is definitely becoming a big issue, both for Creative Commons and also CC Plus. We've had conversations about offering the commerce side of it as well, and how to do that in a consistent way. And fundamentally, the great thing about metadata, I always call it's sort of the technology of the possible. You can do whatever you want with it. And I think there's going to be more and more opportunities coming up to take advantage of this communication channel that's in the asset itself. And so I invite you, if you're a developer, check out the SDK, start using it, give me feedback, and that's it. Are there any questions? Great.
We can take questions at the end after everybody's as well, kind of as a group.
Cool.
Thanks, Gunnar, for being here and talking about that. So Stephen is going to, Stephen is going to speak next from Songbird. And while they're switching out computers, I just wanted to mention that something that's kind of been hinted at but not really said directly, both by Gunnar and Ashish, is that, and Ben a little bit too, I guess. So if you read the CC-REL paper, there's a section not only on HTML but also on other media types. And XMP is the sort of concrete expression that we're recommending for a lot of these different content types, because it's freely licensed and made available appropriately, and because it is extensible and it meets sort of our sort of what we identified as priorities for being able to be extended and being standards based and that sort of thing. And so we're happy to have Gunnar here today talking about that some more.
I'm actually kind of curious as how many people have heard of Songbird? Wow, that's pretty good. Now for the follow-up, how many people actually use Songbird? That seems about right. All right, so for the people that haven't heard of it, or for the people that I know are just dying for us to get to 1.0 so that they can start using it, real quick, just in one slide, what is Songbird? Songbird's a cross-platform media player. We're built on the Mozilla stack. Our whole goal and our message has been that we're going to be a media player for the web. We're going to play all the multimedia content that you can find on the web, and we're going to make it look like there's no differentiation between remote content versus your local content. Because we're built on Mozilla, we get a lot of cool extensibility. It's super easy to customize extensions and skins and all sorts of open APIs to extend Songbird, both from the client side and from the web side. And I'll show an example of that in a little bit. So there's a lot of there's been a lot of talk about metadata, and that's really all I'm going to talk about here. Back in the days when we had vertical silos of communities like the AOL community and the CompuServe community and Delphi and Prodigy, where you had a service provider that controlled all the content that went on there. It was obvious where the content came from, who was delivering it, who owned the copyright, and things like that. AOL could vet everything that went onto AOL's network. CompuServe could vet everything that went onto CompuServe's network. That becomes less so these days, right? Where you have this huge, massive internet, and those vertical silos of content are now gone. And just for CompuServe is still alive, apparently, in some small little portion of AOL. So our message has been, we play the web. We connect any web service, any website to any device. So that's what we want to be. Sort of getting there now. But what are some of the problems? So like I mentioned, in this slide, there's a lot of, the internet's huge. There's a lot of content on the internet. And there's a lot of problems with metadata on that content. It can be inconsistent. It could be incorrect. It could be non-existent. How many people, you don't have to name your names, but how many people download torrent files of new albums and things like that, and you see like the comment field is like ripped by hacker teens or something like that, right? It's annoying. Like you get this content with really lame or incorrect metadata. And that's why we have a ton of services like FreeDB, MusicBrainz, GraceNote, all those things that become metadata repositories, places for you to get the correct metadata. So this is the problem with a lot of the content on the web. And if our message is we want to get that content and put it into your library and display it next to your local content, you've gone to all these great lengths to tag and correct your metadata for your local files to make sure they're all correct, and you want to be able to make sure those propagate cleanly to all your local files, and that you can tag remote media files as well. There's also the problem of subjective versus universal metadata. I downloaded some MP3s the other day where the genre was best song ever. Like, that's completely subjective, right? There's a lot of people in America that feel, Britney Spears is the best song ever. I disagree strongly. So, like that sort of metadata, it's correct in the sense that you're describing your data, right? Metadata is a way for you to describe your data. There's a ton of songs. I would easily go through and tag all my Weezer songs, best song ever, but it's subjective. So we need to be able to apply subjective metadata that maybe doesn't get propagated to the file. That when you send it to all your other friends, they're not necessarily going to want to see that. And then there's also the issue of non-standard or unsupported metadata. So metadata fields that no other player is currently using or supporting, and metadata is useless if people can't see it, right? So this is my last slide. I'm not very big on slides, but so what are some of the things Songbird is working on? So we've been working with Creative Commons recently to build in the license support into metadata for ID3 tags and ape tags and OGG tags and all those. So we actually followed the Creative Commons spec they have on their wiki, and we integrated that, or we made a bunch of patches to taglib, which is a really common open source tagging library that a lot of media players like, I know Amarok and Songbird use it. I believe Rhythmbox does as well. So we built a bunch of patches for that, for license information. We're working on propagating those back upstream into taglib 2.0. Some of the other things that we've been trying to do are connecting the user that's consuming the content back to the content creator or the origin. So when you download a file from, let's say, CC Mixter or Jamendo or Magnatune, being able to connect you back to the artist page on Magnatune, or being able to ultimately connect you back to the artist website themselves. So right now we're doing the first thing where we're able to connect you back to the site that you downloaded the music from, and we're working on ways to do the other. One of the other things that we want to do is make the user aware of license and copyright information. And this is something that not a lot of media players are doing right now. I think Ashish mentioned Rhythmbox might be. It's something we're definitely trying to do. Media players can play a lot of illegal content as well as legal content. We're striving very hard to make sure that the user is aware of what their content is. And I mean, we get users coming into our RSC channel all the time like, can I use Songbird to download illegal files? And we're like, well, yeah. You can. It's a web browser, much like you can use your car to crash into someone and kill someone. I mean, yeah, it's a tool. Whatever you're going to use it for, it's kind of up to you. But users have that heightened awareness that there is illegal versus legal content, and we want to distinguish between the different licenses and how they're using that and consuming that content. So one of the things that Songbird does is it scrapes web pages for audio content and eventually video content on that web page. Right now, it's really, really simple and just looks for like supported files like MP3s, OGGs, FLACs, things like that. We're trying to make it extensible now so that we can do really cool things like parse microformat information, or RDFAs for the CCRL stuff would be really cool. And then display that license information that may be on the web page and not actually embedded in the file itself, but parse it and then display it next to the media file in the web playlist that we pop up. I'll show a demo in a little bit. And And then eventually we could propagate that back to the file so that it can be actually embedded in the file itself if the format supports it. And this is, again, just making the user aware of license information about the media content they're consuming. We've tossed around some other not quite fully baked ideas, generic metadata repositories, being able to have metadata repositories for license information, concert event info, album art. I mean, it's super extensible. Right now, you've got to make a provider for every single repository. So we have a Last.fm repository and AMG repository, and they're tied into this full extension mechanism. And we want to just make that into some generic, where you can just describe your event repository in an XML format, let's say, and drop it in, and then the user can just drop in whatever repositories they want for their content to be checked against. And then one of the other things that obviously as a media player we could really do is for helping users correct their metadata is doing some acoustic fingerprinting stuff, which is something we've done a mock-up, but it's not been really great, and what we want to do is just be able to put that into the background, so when the user is idle, which is actually the use case for a lot of media players, where people started up, play music, minimize it, and then go start doing the rest of their work. And in this age of quad-core, multi-threaded, multi-core CPUs, where we have a web browser and a text editor up, and you don't really need those other 3 cores, we could be doing useful stuff like acoustic fingerprinting, matching that up against MusicBrainz information, stuff like that. So for just wanted to show Songbird real quick. So I know when I was talking about the web playlist thing, that kind of, I saw some eyes glaze over. But I'm going to pull up Jamendo, and I know our good friends from Jamendo are here. So I hope your website's up, otherwise I'm going to be embarrassed. So Jamendo is like a totally great example of a site with a ton of Creative Commons licensed content that works really well in Songbird. And what they've done right now is they've made some specific API calls for describing content and license information that Songbird can then propagate. So let's see, when we go to like this page right here, and I'm on a shrunken screen, so those things kind of contracted a little bit. But you can see this is popping up, this whole web playlist area where I've got download buttons. I can download this content into my library. I can play it directly from my from the web page itself. There's share buttons, and what Jamendo is doing that I don't think any of our other I've not seen any other website use, is they're displaying the license information, the Creative Commons license info right here, right next to the track. And currently in this version of Songbird that I built last week, we're not propagating this license information back into the file, and what we want to be doing is propagating that back in so that when I play this track outside of the Jamendo webpage, I'm aware of that. When I send this track to someone else, that license information is embedded such that everyone can see this and that it'll propagate easily. Because definitely one of the things that Songbird does as a media player and a web browser is it lets you mash up all sorts of cool content off the web. Like when I go and start playing something in my library, let's see if I have this extension loaded. Let's hope this works. Nathan gave me bad vibes about live demos, so now I'm all nervous. Come on, work. Right, so like this is an example of an extension that's pulling a ton of content from all sorts of various websites. So like Last.fm, Flickr, I'm playing Bad Religion right now, and it's grabbing concert info from Last.fm about Bad Religion, Flickr photos, YouTube, artist bio from Wikipedia, lyrics from LyricWiki, and tags and stuff. So like it's all sorts of disparate web sources all coming into my media player. And one thing that's noticeably missing is license information, right? Like I could see the Flickr one if I click on it and pop up that Flickr page. What would be really cool is a uniform way to, if these web pages provide that sort of license information by microformat or RDF or whatever, then we could then be aware of that and display that, in a tooltip or hover over or something like that. So that's all I have. I'll turn it over to Lucas.
Thanks, Stephen. So our final speaker of this panel is Lucas Ganzi, and he, formerly of Yahoo fame, maybe he's going to tell us what he's doing now, but I'll turn it over to him.
Okay, so my name is Lucas Ganzi. I'm known for working on web-related music, including WebJ, XSPF, Yahoo Media Player, and CC Mixter with friends. Actually with many friends who are here. Web of Song. Are you sure? Oh, there we go. Were we not online?
No, I've got a weird Imperator extension.
Right on. All right. So, but right now I'm not working for anybody. I'm taking the summer off and having fun, and I'm just going to talk about something that's interesting to me. And let me just use the real mic. It's fine. But thanks. All right. So this presentation is on my website, gans.com/webofsongs. And let me point out that this is kind of this hand-hacked slideware I made, and you're welcome to modify this and improve it. It's simple and easy to do and Emacs friendly. All right. So the context of this conversation is about making music a first-class region of the web, and this kind of is related to asset management and curation in the following sense. That we can assume, or I assume, that if music is webbier, then all sorts of web technology that manages curation is going to become useful without any music-specific work. So music-specific work is to kind of transpose the whole musical world into the web, and that involves a variety of things. In particular, two general types of activities. One is developing web technology that supports music. So for example, our group that developed XSPF created a webby playlist format. And that was kind of web work to support music. But there's another way of thinking about this work, and that is adapting musical practices. So people who deal specifically with music do a lot of things that are kind of make it less webby. For example, I would kind of think of peer-to-peer protocols as being unwebby, and I would try to move music away from file sharing networks that don't use web protocols. So here's my proposal that I'm going to talk about in my 10 minutes here, and that is that there should be a good URL for each and every song, and I mean one good URL for every song. So this is kind of a loaded proposition with a lot of little pieces. And let's be specific on what the pieces are. Comprehensiveness. Every song out there should have a URL. And actually, as it happens, this is an ongoing thing that nobody needs to really get involved in making happen. Over the last 5 years or so, pretty much everything has been ripped and is being uploaded somewhere, courtesy of a lot of different projects. And it's kind of a law of the digital world that everything gets digitized and seeps onto the internet somehow or other. So that's coming along pretty well. And in this talk, I'm going to talk about unique identifiers. I'm sorry, that there should be a single good URL for each song. And I'm not going to talk about the stability of URLs of songs, because we all know that songs on the web come and go constantly. These are bad URLs. They pop into existence and disappear after a week, and that's no good. But I'm not going to talk about that here. But I just want to repeat this proposition. Songs should have URLs. No, I'm serious about that. I'm not kidding. And every song should have a URL, and there should only be one. And let me get a little bit meta and point out, this is a way of thinking about internet music technology that for people who are interested in it, that you might want to consider this way of approaching internet music as being different and more productive than working on BitTorrent, which is kind of fundamentally unwebby. Okay, so we're talking about the uniqueness of URLs for songs. That is to say, the proposition is a song should have one URL. And you think about the current state of things, that it couldn't be less true that each song has one URL. Let's say there's a hit song in the world of MP3 bloggers. That means every single MP3 blogger rips their own CD, puts it on a server, gives it a different URL, and then takes it down after a week. And then some of these end up on file sharing networks. Maybe some of them are on student accounts that last for 6 months and fall apart. One of them is on the record company site. The record company may actually have the song on their site. It's probably on MySpace if it's the hit. It's all over the place. And this causes a real problem in terms of bringing the benefits of webbiness to the music world, because you can't accumulate link count, inbound link count, and all the other supporting technology that makes the web work for text, for blogs, for photographs in a lot of ways. Because people generally will deep link to a photograph rather than make a copy of it. And that's a good thing for the web as a whole, because then you have extra links pointing to the same photograph. It indicates context, semantics, popularity, all sorts of goodness. It's kind of nutritious for the space of photography. It comes from the practice of deep linking and of sharing deep links. And this doesn't apply to music. And the reason is everybody invents a new song every time they start a new conversation. Everybody invents a new link for the same song every time they start a different conversation about that song. So that was a long-winded way of talking about something that is described in the web architecture document this way. That dividing the web of related resources is harmful. Let me point out, this is in the web principles of web architecture, and what we're doing on a practical level here is taking stuff out of good practice, good web development practice, and applying it to music. We're just simply saying, no, music-related practices should be the good ones and not the bad ones, kind of raising expectations in a way. Web architecture describes this in terms of Metcalfe's law, the benefits of network effects, and that seems a little more new agey than I'd like it, but I think it is clear enough. Okay, so why aren't we reusing song URLs? 4 reasons. Number 1, there's a taboo against deep linking to third-party MP3s. This isn't universally shared, but it is widely shared, and a lot of people will get really mad at you. They'll call it hot linking. Hot linking, as if it made them hot under the collar. It's just the weirdest little, social thing. There's also kind of an atmosphere of fear, uncertainty, and doubt about good linking practice as it applies to music in particular, because the music industry is having a difficult time making this transition, and so most people think that music is illegal by default, and therefore URLs, a normal URL is a broken way of dealing with music on the web. I mean, let me just say this. Most people feel that URLs that are straight up as they apply to music are illegal. And you couldn't sell them. You could spend 45 minutes talking to your English teacher about this and she would not believe you. There's nothing you could say that would convince her. Number 2, one of the reasons why there's so much duplication of URLs, relatively minor one, but it's that anytime you have a different media format, you're going to provide a different URL. So let's say you have the WAV version and the MP3 version. You're going to have one at .mp3 and one at .wav. It gives you 2 URLs. And the reason that you're doing this is that HTTP content negotiation, which allows for this specific way of splitting the namespace into redundant URLs that apply to the same abstract object, the song, a different set of identifiers, the specific URLs with .mp3 or .wav. That's happening because the content negotiation features of HTTP haven't been broadly adopted, and don't seem to have momentum towards becoming adopted. So it's a very obscure part of HTTP for the most part, and there's some very practical web work that could be done to improve adoption of content negotiation. Number 3, complementary activities work around provisioning bottleneck. What I mean here is the main practice of music-related activities on the web is for complementary activities, such as writing about music, such as kind of accumulating digital identity. So, for example, you take an act you like, put their song on your MySpace page, and you kind of do it as a form of clothing. So, if you think about this, the Dana Boyd quote is culture in, identity out. You take in artifacts of culture and you put them out as parts of your identity. I like Puccini, and that makes me refined, right? So that's a complementary activity, and in order to practice any of those complementary activities on the web with relation to music, you have to find the URL, you have to find the file yourself and put it on the website yourself. You're going to have to do your own provisioning. So in doing your own provisioning, you're always going to have to create a new URL. Hence, there's this endless minting of redundant URLs for the same songs. Long-winded, makes sense? All right. Number 4, few pure play provisioning sources. This is kind of another way of saying the previous item, but it is that there's very little web activity related to providing songs. Almost nobody really provides songs. It's a lousy business, and what people provide is social networking, identity, commentary, annotation. Right? Those are the products. The songs are there as a complement, and there's almost nobody who really does provisioning. Archive.org does provisioning. When YouTube in some capacity exports media and could be thought of as being in a pure provisioning business. And there are a couple other contexts, but basically nobody does pure play provisioning. And as a result, there's an endless splitting of the number of provisioning sources and minting of new redundant URLs. So, all right, last slide. All right, so what can we do about these issues? Here, I'm just going to pull some things out of the air, and I sort of want to plant in your mind more than the specifics of these arguments, this way of thinking about music, that you'll raise your expectations of the music industry and expect it to just do the same, to have the same good practices as every other part of the internet, and so all these things sort of flow from that expectation. So what can we do about fixing these things? These are kind of novel ideas, but one idea is decentralized sole sourcing, and this idea is there should be a single source for each media item as much as possible, but anybody can be that single source, and we should develop technologies and practices to make that possible. So, for example, you are a label and you put out a CD. You then host all the songs in that CD in all the formats anybody is going to like, and you manage distribution of those songs web-wide using technology and business practices. For example, you might have a big list of accepted referrers. So you might say Bob's blog can direct link to the song and Mary's blog can't. You might say we're going to allow YouTube and other video sites to use the song in remixes by accepting that as a referrer header and letting YouTube use Smile to do client-side remixes and put together the movies on the fly. You recognize this is kind of a pretty far out piece of technology I'm kind of making up on the fly, but the point being that you can actually you can do a lot of creative hacking and business work to allow song URLs to become more and more focused on single providers. And let's say it's Matador. Matador could just run the web server for this one song on their album, and there's a lot we could do to make that possible. So it's kind of wacky, but it's an interesting space to be in, and it would have a direct impact on this problem. and make music webbier and make recommendations work better and all these other things that are genuinely good. Number 2, content resolution. Content resolution is an idea from XSPF, and what this is about is that you would have dynamic the representation of the resource, that is the song, would be picked up dynamically at runtime, and it would and the description of what you need to know in order to do that fetch would be the static thing. So there's a document, it contains metadata. The metadata is kind of a query. It says, this title of this song is more or less like this, hit me baby one more time, with misspellings or whatever that's going to be. And at runtime, we're going to do a search, and we'll figure out what URL to use to actually find the song. And that back-end URL changes all the time. We expect it to, we expect those things to fuzz in and out of existence. But at some point, somewhere, somebody's hosting Hit Me Baby One More Time, and so we're going to map between those two things. Content resolution is kind of a client-side thing. It says what's persistent is the query string, and the information content that allows you to map a user desire, a user thought. I want that song into a specific URL that gets turned into a specific set of bytes, PCM bytes that get mapped into the speakers, right? So this is a query that's persistent and gets carried around. It's kind of a pure technology. And lastly, Pax Romana. And let me just say, Pax Romana is by far the most likely thing to happen here, because it always happens in our industry. And that is, there's one or two winners, everybody accepts it, and any truth that doesn't come from the one or two winners is unstable and unreliable, and we embrace it. So, for example, it could be that there's some enormous industry player that's extremely stable and is capable of provisioning songs with relatively stable URLs, and all the other URLs are kind of winking out of existence so rapidly that nobody wants to use them, and so everybody converges on using this one major vendor. Let's say we're talking about Rhapsody, and Rhapsody is providing a link for Stairway to Heaven, and it works pretty reliably, and even though Rhapsody's a kind of a pain in the ass, over the years, that one link persists, and anybody who posts their own rip of Stairway to Heaven on their MP3 blog, like, that link is no good. It's gone in a week, so nobody links to it. So Rhapsody ends up becoming the canonical source of Stairway to Heaven. This is kind of how our industry works in a lot of ways, and it's not a great thing. I mean, it's really not a good thing about our industry, and that's the likely solution, because it'll happen naturally. As a few dominant vendors are able to provide stable URLs, those are the ones that'll survive. That's it for me. The URL of this page is gons.com/webofsongs. You're welcome to hack the source of this presentation. It's very hackable, easy as pie. And that's it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Lucas. So we actually need to move along. So we might have time for a couple questions while we're switching computers. We can take those for the panel, and maybe we can have further discussions in the hallway or at lunch. So are there any questions for any of our panelists while Mike is setting up?
Lucas, I have a question for you. Doesn't the sole sourcing model create a real asymmetry? I mean, in the sense that there will be, one source or one resource or one song with essentially enormous control over that kind of content once everyone has converged on the URL. I mean, there is some beauty to redundancy because it makes the whole thing much less enforceable and doesn't lead to this enormous power shift.
Well, do you feel that way about New York Times article?
No, I don't. I mean, because, this is, it's one particular article, but I mean, you were using the example like one particular song, like Stairway to Heaven, for example, right? And you have to know essentially into whose hands control over this particular asset will be transferred in the long run. And that one person could then essentially, or one entity, could then change the rules aim for everyone who essentially links.
I actually see that as a benefit. Can everybody hear that? Okay, so this is a very central issue that the decentralized sole sourcing solution gives a lot of power to whoever owns that URL. And that amount of power can potentially be destructive. So I would say that I think that's actually that's a benefit of that approach. That that we'd say that rather than chasing copiers all over the internet, that a publisher, somebody who a rights holder would manage their relations with the internet by controlling access to the URL. And there's extensive technical tools for access control. And it's a pretty good toolkit. And it would be kind of a less confrontational, crazy, less legalistic way of managing control, and so maybe a more constructive environment. So I kind of like that aspect of it. But you don't have to like it because it's just it's one idea of how to do it.
So we actually need to move along to our next talk. I'm really sorry that we don't have time for more questions because I have interesting thoughts about all three of our presentations. But so I want to thank our panelists for being here today. And up next is Mike Linksfair, who's going to give a talk about kind of setting the stage for our afternoon panel about digital copyright registry technologies, technology landscapes, challenges, and opportunities.
Thanks. I'll go fast because this is going to be fuzzier, as you can see from the landscape. And I'm between you and lunch. So everybody knows what this is. It's the hammer and sickle symbol of communism. Bill Gates called Creative Commons communist a few years ago, but he was wrong about that. Anyway, what do you think this is? It could be a stylized hammer and sickle, but does anybody recognize what it is? It is the symbol of the U.S. Copyright Office, which runs a registry. So why do I bring this up? Because I'm not casting aspersions on the U.S. Copyright Office, at least not right now. This is a statement from the Creative Commons Frequently Asked Questions that was launched with the launch of Creative Commons. I pulled it from the Internet Archive, useful service, and you can tell from the timestamp in that URL from December 16th, 2002. You can read it, and here's the full context. Is Creative Commons building a database of licensed content? Absolutely not. We believe in the net's not a centralized Soviet-style information bank controlled by a single organization. And the rest of it describes basically the stuff that you heard about this morning and that we've actually been building for the last 5 years. So why talk about digital copyright registries right now? Well, there are a bunch of reasons, but first I want to tell you this. So one reason that a lot of people are thinking about copyright registries and things like this, although and that has kind of a downstream effect of people asking Creative Commons, is because of not this, which is a picture of orphan rock in Australia, but people are talking a lot about orphan works. And this is actually not an orphan work. In fact, we know who took that photo, and it's in a database of Powerhouse Museum in Sydney, I believe. Another reason to start talking about copyright registries now, and I couldn't believe how good of a segue Lucas's presentation was, is the kind of yin and yang of centralization and decentralization. We now have probably many millions of CC licensed works, and not to speak of the billions of cultural works on the web that are published in a decentralized manner. But all decentralization often creates opportunity for centralization to pull out the value that's been created in a decentralized way. And Google is the primary example of this. They've created more value through centralization of stuff that's published on the web. than anybody else. And obviously, and the reason why Lucas's talk was so perfect for this is he wants to have a unique URL for every song on the web. But then, what's his prediction about how that's going to actually happen? Pax Romana, a couple of one or two big players are actually the preferred providers. So a bunch of other reasons. Those are just two that I quickly found good pictures of. And OrphanWorks are definitely not the primary reason. There's decentralization and centralization. There's the need for provenance. This is also kind of a symptom of our great success, that now there are millions of works available, and more prominent users want to make use of those works, but they need to know more than just somebody on the web has said that you can use this with attribution. But who and what are other rights that go along with the work, for example. In this particular context, a good reason to talk about registries is that registry-like functionality is a good aspiration and framing for the technologies that we're building. Even if nobody ever builds a registry, the kind of things that you expect a registry to be able to do, you ought to be able to do on the web if the technologies that we've been talking about have been successful. Then there are simply a bunch of people doing work in this area. Many startups, some that are explicitly building registries. You'll hear from some in a minute or after lunch. Some are accidentally building registries as a side effect of what they're doing, or maybe it's not so accidental. And then there are 4 nonprofit efforts leading in the registry direction. And finally, because of all this, people keep on asking what is. They didn't read the FAQ 5 years ago. Actually, though, that's no longer in the FAQ. And we've learned a lot in the last 5 years. So who knows whether. So we're at an exploratory stage, and people want to know what we're going to do. So this is this meeting is really the beginning of that exploration. So then, so in case you don't know, copyright law in the U.S. Registration was required up until 1978, I believe. Although remember, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm going to go through really quickly because we're short on time. So one problem is that, and this is one of many changes that really is a reason Creative Commons exists, is that in 1978 copyright became automatic. You no longer needed to register. So instantly, whatever problems a registry had before 1978, the problems got much bigger because a tiny fraction of things that are in fact copyrighted are in the registry. And for what it's worth, you can see the kind of volume that the Copyright Office does. 500,000 registrations in 2005. They have electronic filing now in beta. I think I read someplace on one of their sites they have registered like 33 million works in the couple 100-year history, which sounds like a big number until you think about web scale, and if you're not talking about billions, it's still pretty small. Which means Creative Commons is still pretty small, although we're inflecting all the time. So what makes a digital copyright registry, as opposed to just a registry, which is basically you ship a National Library Copyright Office some stuff, and with a little bit of documentation, and it's on some paper, and maybe a researcher can look it up. Well, digital copyright registry, obviously all of the interfaces are digital. Presumably you can deposit a digital work. You can do the kind of queries that you can do against digital works. It doesn't require hiring a researcher to go and look up stuff in a card catalog. However, I think much more interestingly, digital copyright registries, or at least as you'll see in the stuff that's emerging, are not necessarily defined or primarily motivated by registration. meaning here's a work I want to establish that I'm the copyright holder, or basically document it in some sense. But there are a whole bunch of different use cases that are resulting in effective registries being built. And then typical web stuff, it's going to be at scale, typically, even if it's within a particular genre. And it's going to be global. Of course, the U.S. Copyright Office is specific to the U.S. There are various other national libraries. But you expect the web to be global. Even if you're targeting speakers of a particular language, you're going to have users all over the place. So where is the demand coming from for these various registry-like things? Obviously, user-generated content upload filtering. A lot of people want that. Some are good and some are bad, but it's certainly creating a demand to be able to recognize content. License management. One way of thinking about this is digital asset management. That we had the last panel was in part on user, meaning that within large organizations that are managing lots of UGC, lots of content deals, there's kind of an internal need to create applications that effectively become registries. Just so they don't have to get a license twice for the same content, if nothing else. User media organization, this is kind of the dual of that. On my desktop, I have a photo and I want to know whether or not I can use it. Not only whether I can use it, but a bunch of other facts about it. Collective rights management. This is something we don't touch on much in the U.S., but collective rights agencies are more powerful elsewhere, and being able to have them collect on long tail stuff means that they need to not only get their current databases into shape, which is a massive project, but expand them. Cultural heritage institutions, or some of them institutional, some of them web projects, are essentially developing big databases of content with metadata about the content, including rights. You could think of the Powerhouse Museum that I showed the picture of the orphan work as one example of that. Finding where content is posted. This is all kind of a use case that a lot of people. It's a demand. People want to know where their content has been posted on the web. But in order to do that, you need to have crawled a whole bunch of content and have some way of identifying the content. And once you've done that, you may as well figure out who owns the content, and then you have all of the classic pieces of a registry coming from a completely different angle. And then there's timestamping, which is from the copyright holder perspective is kind of the traditional registry use case. I want to demonstrate that I am the person who created this and nobody else timestamped this before me. But also from the user case, I want to be able to timestamp a license assertion, for example, that Ben published a photo in his Flickr stream. And if he takes it down, I want to have a record of it. It might be good to have a third party record that, and what better third party than somebody who is keeping track of copyright holders and works and things like that. So a bunch of people are trying to meet these demands. And many of them are here, and I'm going to characterize the people meeting these demands as fitting into several different buckets, and many of these projects fit in multiple buckets and won't agree with how they're characterized, but that's just a problem with categorization. So redo this slide deck with tags if you want to complain about that. So the simplest case is basically replicating replicating the U.S. Copyright Office, although you're not actually registering a copyright. And I like to call this build it and they will register. So basically you put up a web app that's backed by a database, and you have a form, and people can say, this is my work, and then you give them a certificate. And you can build other services on top of that, and I'm sure that each of these has a story in terms of what additional value add they're providing on top of that. But you actually, using the technology that I gave that I promoted on an earlier panel, Semantic Media Wiki, I think you could put together a build it and they will register in approximately, what's your estimate on that, Nathan? Oh, okay. Well, in fact, I was just talking to somebody and they did this. I don't know if they are using Semantic Media Wiki, but it would take 5 minutes to some other very, very short amount of time to develop a build it, and they will come register with a wiki. So that's a simple case. Hopefully, people are building more services on top of that. So another class of suppliers are basically people who have other needs, or they're already managing a database of works about a particular domain. Collecting societies are a good example of this. In order to collect from cafes and whoever else they collect from, and to distribute royalties accurately, they need to have a giant database of music, basically, and they're already curating that, and so they could open that up to other uses and basically become a registry service. I already mentioned cultural institutions as another kind of that kind of case. So, but we also have web projects that are essentially trying to manage all of the information about a particular domain. And two that are here are Music Brains and Open Library Music in the music space, and Open Library currently in the book space. Although I think they have more aspirations than that. Another is satisfying an internal need. I already talked a bit about that. Big companies needing to manage all of their kind of licensing needs. However, another interesting case of that is not managing an internal need, but building what is effectively a register in order to be able to provide another service. Now, NoAnk, I know they're here and going to be on the next panel, is an example of that. I'll let them. I think they're an example of that, but they can talk about themselves. And I want to speed through this. Another class of suppliers are people who are effectively building a registry or something that could scale to a registry as a side effect of providing some service. Attributor is here, and they can describe their service. I kind of like I hinted at it in an earlier slide. You can, and Jamendo is also here, and I understand one of their aspirations is basically to be the database of all openly licensed music. I think they're just surpassed 10,000 albums, so congratulations to them. Then in kind of other domains, or not entirely other domains, there's people like Last.fm, which effectively has built a database of all music that exists, because whenever some percentage of people who have their play their music, it reports, so they actually know a lot about a lot of music that doesn't exist either because of bad tagging. But in any case, Flickr is another example of a site that effectively could be thought of as building a registry of photos, but they're doing it entirely as a side effect. I mean, they have billions of photos, including, for the most part, copyright information about them and photographer, some cases geolocation. And in some sense, that might be more valuable for a registry built as a side effect, because they actually have the work, and the cost of creating the registry was purely a side effect. YouTube is obviously an example of that for videos. So there's going to be a little bit of overlap here, so I'm going to go through these slides even more quickly. What are some different approaches for creating registries? One is cataloging works. And user action and attention are two good ways to bootstrap that. MusicBrainz, Last.fm are good examples of this. Crawling the web is kind of a classic case. Existing catalog curation by an intermediary. I mentioned collecting societies and cultural heritage institutions as examples. Then finally, you have the explicit registration by copyright holder, which is the classic U.S. Copyright Office and case, and the build it and they will come registry case. And I think I was planning to mention crowdsourcing with respect to the user action case. Some people don't like that, but there's this great talk on commerce and community that I recommend that you all look at, which there's a URL for, if you decide to do that sort of thing. Another approach to doing a registry is to, oh, I'm sorry. So those are approaches to building a registry. Then what are approaches to using a registry, although I called it a catalog here for some strange reason. One is that you have a work that is marked with a reference to a registry. So this gets to where the kind of build it and they will come use case can become useful, as they face a massive chicken and egg problem. But basically, if they're providing a certificate that is published along with the work, then that provides basically a provenance link that somebody can follow and get back to the registry. Content-derived identifier lookup to registry. Basically, this means that if you have a work and there's a way to identify the work by looking at the content itself, then that can get you back to the registry. And something I've been involved with, I believe Gordon, the founder of Bitsy, is here. Took that approach, and people are taking fuzzier approaches to identifying photos and things that are essentially using not necessarily content-derived identifiers, content-derived lookups, although identifier and lookup are synonymous in some cases. Then there's searching the registry, which has a whole bunch of different variants, from actually typing in a keyword to using via an API. Then there's a whole bunch of processes naturally built on top of a registry, which could include things like acquiring additional rights for work because given the registry you actually know who the copyright holder is. So what are the challenges for people building registries and using registries? I've probably hinted at a bunch of them, but identifying works is always a massive challenge and could basically there are conferences dedicated to this. So identifying owners is another problem. It's less of a problem in the traditional case, although somebody can still the traditional registry use case, although somebody can obviously still make fraudulent ownership claims. Namespace monopolists. There have been there are a bunch of people. There have already been a bunch of failures over the last few years in this space. People either implicitly or explicitly trying to build a registry, and many of them, whether they realize it or not, basically want to say, "I'm going to dole out identifiers for works, and I'm going to get a critical mass, and then people have to pay me to get an identifier." So an example of this would be like digital object identifiers, although there have been many less thoughtful attempts as well. And I think creating monopolies unnecessarily or without a great deal of thought is always dangerous. Then there's making it webby. Copyright registration the web didn't exist when it was developed. And there's a typical problem of kind of bringing copyright together with technology, which causes a lot of confusion. I think that's one of the values that Creative Commons has, is that we actually have copyright lawyers and technologists who understand their respective domains and can actually talk to each other and make sense. Then there's the problem, which I've repeated twice on this slide, which is basically in terms of the benefits of creating the registry has to be greater than the cost of creating it, and metacrap is another way of saying that, basically. Copyright information is just metadata about works. And creating and curating that metadata is costly. If there isn't a clear benefit, it's going to be bad data. And that's a problem that any registry has to deal with. And even if you're taking the approach of crawling the web, because you have to have some quality control. Related to that, there's the problem of who pays. A problem that was hinted at with metadata generally in earlier talks is that if nobody sees it, it's worthless. And you're asking people to create registries, and initially they're going to be small, not integrated into a bunch of software. So the benefits are not going to be great for anybody, which creates a chicken and egg problem. And who's going to pay to bootstrap that process? Then scams are yet another problem, and very few people understand copyright, period. And even just for copyright registration now, there are a whole bunch of scams out there. It's basically saying, pay me on this website some money and I'll make sure your copyright is protected forever. I'll register your copyright or whatever. We have a whole bunch of people claiming to be copyright registries, but they're actually not that. Then we're going to have to do an awful lot of education to make sure that kind of copycats who just want to collect registration fees and provide no value to the user don't proliferate and gain market share. And I say that digital copyright registries won't actually be copyright registries in the sense that when you register something with the U.S. Copyright Office, at least in the U.S., you can get some advantages if you actually go to trial. And I'll just insert, I am not a lawyer, and go no further, but that doesn't mean that we wouldn't aspire for eventually the U.S. Copyright Office to, fully embrace the web, or for them to embrace Creative Commons and people we work with, to build registries that would affect copyright registry. But it's a dangerous education path that we have to take. So I think this is my second to last slide. This is a very, very funny entry in the U.S. Copyright Registry. You can actually go and do a search on the Library of Congress homepage. It's the entry for Code version 2, the book by our founder, Lawrence Lessig. And the funny thing about it is the copyright claimant is Lawrence Lessig, CC attribution share alike. So obviously somebody tried to Commons enable the U.S. Copyright Registry, but of course you can't actually, you can actually click on Lawrence Lessig CC attribution share alike, but of course there are no other authors with that exact name. So it was a good idea, but if in fact they had a field for license or for public license, then CC attribution share alike could be a value for that field, and possibly you could search the registry based on license, which would be cool. So what are some, there are some things that registries or proto-registries ought to do to support the commons, both in terms of the registry space being a commons and something that can grow the web, and supporting openly licensed materials. Thinking about interoperability, and I think using semantic web technologies is a good way to do that, is one way to make sure the registry space is itself commons-like. A way to go even further down that road is to think of registries as open services, possibly where there's some community governance in some cases, possibly publishing of source code, open source. I can never remember this word when I want to think of it. Test suites and reference implementations. And this has nothing to do with copyright registries, but the Open Social Foundation that was blogged about a couple of months ago actually has a bunch of really great principles around keeping the protocols and code, et cetera, around social networks open. And I think that people building registries should look at that example. And then finally, registries in terms of supporting the commons of the stuff they're registering. Obviously, we want anybody building a registry to build awareness of Creative Commons licenses into that and do a better job than the hack that I just showed you. So then I think that registry, I mentioned towards the beginning that one of the reasons to talk about registries now in terms of technology is a useful aspiration and framing for the technology we're building. But I think you can take that beyond copyright, and that the issues of provenance, they're of particular relevance to copyright, but they're really a problem on the web generally, which is decentralized, and you want to know what agents can you trust, what data is true, etc. And it's possible that people innovating to build registries that can solve those problems for copyright will contribute to the general health of the web, which would be fantastic because in general, copyright enforcement has been horrible for the health of the web and has led to many of the problems with music, for example, that Lucas described. And then, of course, Creative Commons is all about using technologies that will enable this sort of thing. And I did a quick ad of Lucas's slide where he was talking about comprehensive, unique, and stable URLs for each and every song. He wasn't proposing a registry. He was just proposing that people had URLs for songs in the web. Which comes to my final slide. The web is the registry. There's not going to be one registry to rule everything, particularly not for all domains. So the challenge that I want to put to the next panel is, what does your registry add to the web? And that is my view. So now I guess it's time for lunch.